if you had a shelf that you would put on there the books that, if they were all on that shelf, would be considered the best of your collection, what would they be? Hi there, it's Mark, with a very croaky voice, so I do apologise. This is a response to a fantastic idea for a episode from Gavin at Genre Books. Thank you, Gavin. And you must go over to Genre Books, wonderful channel. There are certain rules that we can't do, so it must be in a language that we can understand. I might break that one, Gavin. They must also exist, so you can't do like a made-up book. And thirdly, it's something that must have been printed, I guess, or known about. They may not be in circulation now, however, and a lot of them of mine won't be. So I think it's a fantastic idea. So here we go. What books would I put on a shelf? Though I have to admit, although I got some shelves down here, and I did this under duress because the two ladies in my life, the wife and the daughter, they made me put stuff away rather than having stacks of books here. Okay, I don't have shelves, but metaphorically speaking. So my first one comes from ancient Greece, and it's How to Write History by Lucian, who was from the old Roman province of Syria. And the reason I would have it is because it's thought that of all the books ever written in terms of history, it's the first one of its type, or the only one that talks about theory of writing history, and it has survived. Love to have it, because being myself very much into history and having written 2 books on the subject, well, historical theme, it's something that really fascinates me. And I am very aware of the fact that the way in which history was written in the past is nothing like we do it now. In fact, I would love to go back to the old way of doing it, but that could be for another episode or another topic. So How to Write History by Lucian. Now, we like to pride ourselves that in the English language we've had novels going back a few years. But the ancient Greeks have a novel, and it's Aethiopicus, or Aethiopica, by Heliodorus, or Eliodoros. And it's potentially one of the earliest novels that we could claim or state that exists. And it was very influential in the 18th century, but pretty much is lost now. We don't really consider it. I've not heard much about it being mentioned anywhere. So that would be my second one. My third would be completely out there, and it's The Secret History of the Mongols, probably round about the 1230s. And as far as we know, it's the only extant work that really gives information about what Genghis Khan was like. No idea who the author is in academic circles, highly influential and respected. I'm hoping the little I know about the book is that it could be something along the lines of The Secret History by Procopius, who really gave the lie as to Julian the Emperor and Theodora's wife, who was known as a trooper. And he dished the dirt on those two, so to speak, possibly in a malcontented manner. But it's definitely a book that I'd love to have on my shelf. The next, and of course none of these are in order of getting up to say number 1. I'm not ranking or tiering these books. So the next choice isn't necessarily better than the previous one, so to speak. But my next choice is The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. And I would love to get the 1492 edition, which you can now see a copy of, beautifully illustrated in woodcuts. It's been a while since I saw a copy, and I think, and I hope I get this right, I think it starts off with the plague in Firenze, Florence, and it's just beautifully written. It's certainly a human comedy, but not necessarily laugh out loud. Next one. So I've mentioned this lady. It's Aphra Behn and Orinoco, and it's about the royal slave. 1688 edition I'd love to have. I've actually read it, and I will get it again. Not that copy, unfortunately, but a copy of it to talk about it, because it's just a fantastic book. Very modern, very fresh, tragic tale. And Aphra Behn did a lot to raise awareness of slavery, especially for black slaves, because Britain had a long history of indentured servitude. A lot of people went out to the Caribbean, white settlers, well, not so much settlers, they went out there and they gave themselves over for 7 years indentured slavery or servitude, and at the end of it they got their freedom. And a lot of people did it to get out of debt or to get away from potential threat of incarceration or worse. But the treatment of black Africans, Aphra Behn was one of the first to really raise it, and she has an unbelievable backstory in her own right. She potentially was a spy for one of the kings. I think it was Charles the First, I think it may have been. Don't quote me on that one. It may be Charles II, I can't remember. But yes, Oronuku, the Royal Slave, A True History. I'd love to get that by Aphra Behn. The next one has an implausibly long title. A dictionary of the English language in which the words are deduced from the originals and illustrated in their different significations by examples from the best writers, to which are prefixed a history of the language and an English grammar by Samuel Johnson in 2 volumes. So, Dr. Johnson's dictionary. Wasn't the first. He's got a lot of historical notes written about him, of course, and it would just be nice to have it on the shelf there because, in a way, it was a forerunner of all the things we did in the 19th century and all the way up to Brewer's Phrase and Fables and so on. I'd have a copy of that one. My next one would be a cookbook, but it's by Robert May and it's called The Accomplished Cook, Art and Mystery of Cookery. In a book that I've written but not published, that is mentioned. One of the characters, and it's a novel that I've written, the main character, the protagonist, is a cook and uses that book. Alexander pottage is one of the recipes. In fact, if I do get the book, and I think I will, I looked it up, it's so expensive, but if I get a copy, I would do that as an episode. I'd make Alexander pottage. Next one would be a series, and they would probably as annual. So it's not one book. I'm cheating here, Gavin. I do apologise. It's the Annual Register from 1758 when Edmund Burke was the editor of the first one. Still in existence, but the ones I would have was really up until the First World War. Each year there was a précis of the year before. And for historians interested with an English slant, and especially going further afield, because the 1758 edition is really the back end of the 7 Years' War. And Burke gives a précis of it, but it's also little snippets of life in England and Great Britain at that time. And it's just a fascinating thing to keep as an historical account. So the Annual Register from 1758 onwards, up until, say, 1914, 1918. And the reason I would stop at that point is because obviously the First World War swept away the old way of life. And my final book, and it's the most up to date, it's from the 19th century, and it's by Thomas Carlyle, The French Revolution, A History in 3 volumes. This book is unbelievable. So the story is that Thomas Carlyle, who was a bit irascible, wrote the whole of the first volume, and he gave it to a mate to look at. And by a terrible accident, it was completely burnt, destroyed. So he had to rewrite it, the whole of the first volume. I think by then he'd written others. But because he went back and rewrote it, he rewrote it in a very fluid style that you could just study the opening volume of this book just for the language and the way in which he writes stuff. It's just amazing. And how he will thread in, obscurely it has to be said, real events, but just his use of language is just a magnificent thing to have. Love this book. And I would definitely have that on the shelf. And that would probably have the central pride of place because I've studied it exhaustively over the years. It's just a brilliant book. So that would definitely be on the shelf. On reflection, all the books I would have are old, and some of them are very highbrow, some are not accessible at all in modern language. I am aware of that. I think I stand the risk of becoming too elitist for my own good, but hey, what's elitism? It's nothing, it's just putting the effort in. So yeah, I am unashamedly elitist in that regard. If I can understand it, anyone can with a bit of application, believe me. So Gavin, wonderful idea, and I love your own choices as well. So what Gavin did, he didn't tag actually. He put a list of names but said, look, this is open for anybody who wishes to do it. So I'm doing it the same. Anybody who comes across this and has not been tagged, consider yourself tagged. Have a go. What would be the books that you would have on your shelf that effectively that would then make the best shelf that you have for books and so on? And if you do it after watching this, please tag me. Let me know that you've done it, or tag Gavin at Genre Books. So, there you go, my list. Ta-ta for now.